So we are starting this week, and we'll go on for the next several weeks, 8 or 9 weeks here, a new series here on Christian living, if we don't have a better title for it. So as we begin to make our way through here in the next couple weeks, we're going to cover a bunch of topics. I know for most of you men, you probably saw the topics that we're going to be covering over the next couple weeks, but we're going to be covering basic Christian topics of living. So we'll cover issues of manhood, womanhood. We'll discuss marriage. We'll discuss children. We'll talk about church life and spiritual disciplines. And we'll talk about vocation or work and friendship. And really our simple aim in this series is to just give you guys practical instruction here from the Scriptures in areas that we pray will be really useful to you all. So, before we dive in here, I guess two just very brief, very quick preliminary thoughts. First is in going through, pulpit moved. In going through a series like this, our goal, we do want to cover as much as we can in these topics, but brethren, as you know, as much detailed as we possibly can get into, the reality is just we won't be able to cover everything that there is to cover about each of their topics. I mean, in fact, we could do a multi-week series on each one of these topics. That's just how much there is to preach. So we just aren't able to cover everything. So with how many issues and things that we could discuss, to discuss them all would just be impossible. So while we can't exhaust these subjects, I really do hope that what we can get from the coming weeks will be edifying, and brethren, hopefully it will just even lead to further conversation. The conversation doesn't need to end here at the pulpit. It should actually just begin here. So please pray that as we go through it the next few weeks, pray the Spirit of God would help me and Nick, and that this would be a very fruitful endeavor for us as a church. And then second, I guess just a quick encouragement to you all in regards to some of the things we're going to go through. Because the reality is, not every single topic we're going to cover throughout the coming weeks will directly apply to you, right? We're going to talk about manhood today. Well, half of you are not men, right? So not every single topic is going to be directly applicable here for you or instructive for you, but brethren, just because a particular subject may not apply to your situation, it still has something to offer you and to teach you for you to grow as a Christian. For some of you, while you may not be in the particular season that the topic falls under, like children or marriage, it may be your future circumstances. So you should want to know more about those things so that you're prepared for those things later on. And brethren, even ultimately, if it doesn't apply to your future at all, you might be a woman who's never going to get married and never have kids again, but you can still be equipped by these messages because, brethren, the reality is you have brothers and sisters in this room who need your encouragement, who need you to care for them, and the best way you can care for people is to know what they need in their lives and what stations of life that they're in. So hopefully that will just kind of stir you guys up to really give attention to these, even if it doesn't necessarily apply directly to you. So let's just jump right in here. With that being said, if we're going to start this series on Christian living, then it seems very appropriate that we're going to start here with what does it mean to be a man or to be a woman? What is biblical manhood and biblical womanhood? Now, today we're just going to cover manhood, so that's what we'll discuss here today. Next week, when Nick starts his portion, he'll do womanhood next week. So what I would like to do this morning in discussing manhood, I'll just give you guys the 2 points right at the beginning because we have a lot to go through. And so I want to look at 2 things as it relates to biblical manhood. So the first one, I want to look at man's design. And a question that we could ask to help you think about what that means is, what is a man made for? Right? If you design something, you've designed that thing, you've purposed that thing, you've made it for something. You have an intention and goal in mind with it. So we're going to look at that. What is man's design? What's he made for? And then two, want to look at a few characteristics of manhood. What marks biblical manhood? What are some of the fundamental attributes of a man? And again, especially in that second one, brethren, forgive me because there's so many to discuss. I'm only going to really pull out four that I thought were at least really important to myself. So let's just begin here then with man's design and ask the question, what is a man made for? So 3 points I want to draw out in this section. So let's look here. Again, Genesis 1:26 through 28. I am going to read it again because as I go through some of these points, I'm going to draw off certain words and certain things going on in this passage. So let's read it again. That way we have it fresh. It's on our mind. So Genesis 1:26 here, verse 26. Begins here. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." And so God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him, male and female He created them. And God said, and God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So let me just, from this passage, give you our first point, and then we'll kind of establish here this point. I think the first aspect that we can gather from the opening pages of Genesis, and obviously throughout the whole of the Bible, but really beginning here, because this is where everything happens, everything begins, is that the first aspect of man's design, what he was made for, is that man was made to be a worshiper. Right? While the text doesn't actually explicitly, obviously, use this word, it doesn't state, and God made man to be a worshiper. Brethren, the context nevertheless implies this reality, right? Man in this passage is uniquely called something that everything else in creation is not. Man is created as a what? He's an image bearer, and he's an image bearer of God. And this means that, obviously men and women, but particularly men here, that a man bears the glory and the likeness of God in a unique relationship with God by simply virtue of his being, right? Because man is man, he is in a relationship with God. He's made in his likeness to reflect his glory, and in doing so, he's supposed to enjoy God, and he's supposed to reflect that glory out into the world. And really, the whole story of Scripture is summarized in that fact. Man's to reflect this glory in the world, and then the world's supposed to be covered with image bearers who what? Who love God and who worship God. And this is what the whole arc of the biblical story obviously is from Genesis 1 onwards. Even after the fall, the goal is not something different. The goal is the same. It's to fill the world with renewed and saved image bearers who once again worship the true God. And so, if we're going to begin anywhere, of what it means to be a man, what we're designed for, then we can't miss this, right? Because we could talk about all sorts of characteristics of what it means to be a man. We could talk what it means to be strong as a man, self-controlled as a man. But brethren, if all of those things are disconnected from the God who made us and the God that we worship, then it's all kind of vanity. Speaking about what makes a man and what doesn't make a man really has no importance if we don't begin here that man is fundamentally a worshiper. That is what we were made for. Our identity, our purpose as people, especially as men, is wrapped up in this fact that we have been made to love and enjoy God. Men are designed for this end, which means then that everything else we're going to talk about is going to flow from this single point. Everything that a man may do, everything that a man may be, or he may accomplish in his life, has to ultimately have this end in mind, that he is to worship and love and serve God. And brethren, this is exactly though why we, in our own culture, in our own day, especially amongst men, why we have so much fallen apart and fallen away from the Lord. Because we have not started here, right? Because think about it. If you don't understand what you were made for, then you won't understand what your purpose is. You won't understand what to do, right? Your duty flows from your design. And if you don't understand that you're made to worship God, then everything else really at that point becomes relative. It becomes meaningless. And brethren, this is why men have lost all sorts in their source of purpose in life. It's because they don't know. I have been created at the end of the day to worship God. That's what it means to fundamentally be a man. To be an image bearer is to worship God. And brethren, the reality is that no amount of books and podcasts and conferences and internet, male mentors, none of that stuff's going to suffice to be able to fix men or to fix us. If we want to have a true biblical manhood, then we have to return back to the starting source. We have to come back to the fount, and it's back to God. We have got to begin here. And in Christ, brethren, this is the good news of the gospel. Christ brings us back. Christ renews the image of God in us. He makes us the men that we were not. And He brings us back into worship with God. So there's man's first fundamental aspect in his design. Second is that a man's design is that he would be a ruler, or that he would have rulership. Now, we don't usually talk that way. What I'm not saying is everyone in here is supposed to be a king or something like that. Not all of you were made to be kings, and probably not me either. But when you read through Genesis 1, what I mean by this idea of being a ruler, having rulership, is man wasn't just created in God's image to worship, as if all man was going to do forever is stand in front of God and sing songs. Right? That's not what man's purpose boils down to. It's more than that. It's not only to worship God, but it's also to have dominion over a realm. And what realm does God make man to have dominion over? The earth, the entire earth, right? God has made man to have dominion over the earth, and He doesn't just say to enjoy it, He says to subdue it. I mean, that idea is very strong. That's like if I said, I'm going to subdue an enemy. Well, I'm not there to make nice with that enemy. I'm here to put him under my will. I'm here to impose my will upon the enemy. And the idea, though it doesn't have a negative connotation that way of treating an enemy poorly, it is this idea of men coming and subduing, ruling, and bringing the creation underneath their rulership and their authority. And again, I know here in the text that both men and women stand here in this call to have dominion and to subdue the earth. But brethren, I think if you were to read Genesis and obviously read the entirety of the Bible, the role of a ruler or rulership, for one to have authority, that role is primarily the role of a man. I mean, you go on just to Genesis chapter 2, and it's like you get this not retelling, but you just get more detail about what's going on in 1. And in 2, when God creates man and woman, who does He create first? He creates man first, right? He's made first, and He's given the task to rule, to have authority. He's got this job He needs to do. Well, then, who's created next out of man? Yeah, the woman. The woman comes from man, is created out of a man, but she's not given the exact same task as him. What task is the woman given there in Genesis chapter 2? Yeah, a helper, right? And now, because I don't want to talk on this, this may be next week, I don't know. But that's not the same job. Because it's not the same function. How mankind is going to impose its rule on the creation to subdue it for the glory of God is going to be done by both men and women. But it's not going to be done the same way by men and women, right? In fact, man is going to be the central ruler and authority figure, and the woman is going to be the man's helper in accomplishing this. So obviously the woman here is of no lesser value because of this, but I think it stands that the man here is singularly the one who is to wield rulership, to wield authority. He bears the ultimate responsibility of carrying out God's authority in the earth. And so part of what it then means then for us as men is that we are to exercise rulership or authority. We are to exercise dominion in God's world by God's means to ultimately serve God. This is why, brethren, when we look throughout the Scriptures, I mean, we could spend a whole hour just listing them. I'm not going to do that. Men are described and portrayed as the authority figures in every area of creation. There are authority figures in the home. There are authority figures in the public, in the civic realm, in government, in culture. And they're also the authority figures in the church, of ruling God's church, of directing God's church. And brethren, this is not some happy accident or some flipping of the coin where God was like, who's going to rule? And God flips a coin and it lands on heads. I guess the men are going to rule. Brethren, this is what God designed into creation. This is how He actually hardwired a man. He has made men to ultimately lead and bear authority. This is God's intention. And this is why He made the world, because He wants men to do this. So I believe that this can be incredibly instructive then for us here as men as we live, brethren. I mean, you all know this. All of you men in here know to a degree that we live in a time where this idea of male rulership or authority or headship or whatever term you want to put to it, where we are told that that is a bad thing. That men ruling, men exercising authority, men having any kind of leadership over others, especially women, is not only a bad thing, but it's something that needs to actually be done away with, right? And ultimately, men are belittled. They're told that your masculine desire to lead is actually something that's toxic. It's something that you need to throw off. And you ladies, though you are not directed in this way as the men are, you are taught that there really is no difference between you and a man. You're just told to really, I mean, some people don't think there's any difference, but some people say, well, there's some biological differences, right? But really, when it comes down to what men and women can do, there is no difference between a man and a woman. In fact, as the saying goes, anything that a man can do, the woman can just do better. And brethren, the sad reality of this is pervasive of our culture. We all may know that, but we have to state it out loud. We have to recognize this. And it's also a reality that has crept into churches. I mean, brethren, even in the church, this idea of men leading and having authority and having others, especially women, be helpers within the church, brethren, this has been abdicated by most men, even within the church, and has been taken up, the mantle been taken up by women. But brethren, listen. We as Christians, when we're confronted with something like that, with what our culture says versus what we're seeing in the Bible, here's what we have to do. We have to reject that. We have to look out to the world and we have to say, we fundamentally reject this impulse to throw off man's authority and to subvert the created order. We have to do it. But brethren, I think probably more importantly is, we've all been affected by it. And so not only do we have to repudiate this, but we kind of need our own thinking to be rewired. And the first way that I think that we do that is in regards to this principle, that God has made men to rule. God has given men the final, ultimate authority in leading. And men, to you specifically, you have got to believe that. If you want your behavior to change, if you want to align yourself with God's purpose for your life, then you have to believe this truth. And you therefore can't abdicate this responsibility and this role from your life. You can't be a passive man. You have to come to know over time what it means for you as a man to rule and to bear authority and for you to do it well. And ladies, you have to believe this truth. Because it's not only the men who are being told lies, it's also you. You must believe and therefore you must accept this truth. That it is not women that God has placed into the role of leadership. He has given you a glorious role. But He has given the role of leadership to men. And you, as ladies, are not to cut against the grain when it comes to that reality. Men are to rule, and you are to give yourself in glad obedience and submission to godly rule and authority. Men are rulers, not women. And yet, brethren, while all this is true, there is something, though, that I think as men we need to help balance this idea out of men having authority and having leadership. Because while it is true that you do bear the the ultimate responsibility of leadership and authority, that authority comes with responsibility. It means that there is, with the role and title of ruler, you guys kind of like that title, some of you guys, hey, ruler sounds good, right? But what comes with that, brethren, listen, is a weighty responsibility that you must bear. Authority naturally assumes responsibility. To properly rule and to properly learn how to exercise authority, we cannot separate it from the responsibility that you have to the things that you're charged to care for. If you're given authority over something, guess who's responsible for those things? You are, men. You're responsible. And brethren, this is important lest the idea of authority go to our heads, because in a fallen world, this does. And I'm not trying to speak against men here or to tear down my own point, but brethren, we got to be balanced here. This is important. Authority without responsibility will just either lead to tyranny, where men are domineering, and men are cruel, and men are cold, and men are callous. Or if no responsibility is taken with that authority, then men will become passive, they'll become inactive, they'll become lazy, and they will let the things in their care suffer. And brethren, none of those options are acceptable as a Christian. We bear an authority as men and as Christian men, but with that we bear an absolute responsibility to care for the things that we are given authority over. And so, brethren, you need to just ask yourself, do you want to lead? And I think for every man who is really trying to follow after the Lord says yes. Maybe not all in the same way, to the same degree, but I don't think there's any man who's trying to be a man who says, I don't want to lead. Men want to lead. And brethren, you need to gladly assume then, gladly, with happy hearts, the responsibility for all the things that come with that authority. We have to. Because if we don't, brethren, authority will either become a crushing weight or it'll be something that we crush others with. And listen, brethren, we can't abdicate responsibility here. We can't. Too many things are at stake as men. And you've been entrusted here with precious, precious realities and gifts. And you've been entrusted to lead and to lead well. And so, brethren, lead and take responsibility for anything and anyone that you happen to be caring for. And brothers, listen, do it well. Because this is what you were made for. You were made by God to care and to serve and to ultimately see others flourish. And this is what you've been remade in Jesus for. So brothers, rule well. Take ownership and responsibility for that which God has given you. Which then leads here into my third point. It's very much connected. This third aspect, I think, of man's design is, brother, not only are you meant to rule well, but I think one major key of what it looks like to rule well is that you are fruitful in your labor. So a way we could put this is men in their design are to be cultivators, right? Right. And what does it mean? Like if I was going to ask you to cultivate a garden, what does that mean to go cultivate a garden? Yeah. I mean, yes, you work, till, but you are pouring an effort to see it flourish, right? You're not there to just shovel dirt, plant seed, water, I don't care, right? Cultivating something ultimately has this connotation of desiring to see something flourish for its good and according to its kind. And so, brethren, this means that as men, if we're going to exercise rulership well, authority over these areas that we have, the way that we can care for others well, the way that we can care for things well, is to see those things flourish. Not just exist, because that's kind of easy, but to see those things flourish, to see those things produce fruit, and to ultimately be fruitful in all the things that we do. Because men, listen, there's a lot, especially young men. Most young men today think the world has been made for them to consume, and it's not. The world is not made for you to just sit back and to enjoy. Brethren, the world is made for you to go and to experience and to help others experience the goodness of the world. That is what it's for. You were made to be fruitful in labor and to cultivate from things or from people goodness for them. To give your energy and effort into seeing things develop, to see things grow, to see people do well, to blossom. And brethren, in that creation mandate in Genesis 1, the primary means, obviously there, in Genesis 1, if we're just going to keep it there, is fruitfulness for a man is for the man to have children. Men are to find a wife and be fruitful and bear children. And now this is obviously probably the easiest application because it's just right there on the surface of the text, right? And this is a good thing, men, right? This is a good thing, again, that you were told is not a good thing, but is an excellent thing. To be a good leader, to be a good ruler, to be fruitful in your labor, first and foremost means that you would one day go out and seek a wife and have babies with her, fill the earth with image bearers. That's a good thing. But the idea, though, here, I think, embedded in Genesis of being fruitful is much more than just popping out babies, even though that's important. I don't want to deny that, right? Childbearing actually is not an end in of itself. We were not made as men to just make children, right? Childbearing has a purpose. It serves an end, right? And it serves a larger purpose to help cultivate things, right? To see the world, and for the world to, I would put it this way, simply to get better, right? It's for us to take rulership over the world and to see God's world and the people who fill it bettered, right? To subdue it and tame it for God's glory so that people experience something better, which I think is encouraging for any man in here, that fruitfulness really is not just limited to you having kids, right? It's not just about what you do in producing children. Because as a man, you just may not be in that season right now, right? I know some of you are not popping out children right now, and that's a good thing. You may not be in that stage of your life, but your ability to be fruitful is not at all diminished because you can't have kids right now. Your ability to be fruitful and to cultivate the things that God's placed in your life is possible because ultimately fruitfulness is about taking what you're entrusted with and making more of it, of helping it to mature and grow. Think of Proverbs 12:14 here. From the fruit of his mouth, a man is satisfied with good, and the work of a man's hand comes back to him. Brethren, being a fruitful man can be had by simply the actions and the words that you take and use in your life in cultivating things for the glory of God. Does not begin with children, but it also doesn't end with children. So you could be childless right now. You could have 6 kids right now. You still have an ability to be fruitful even if you're not having kids at the moment, because that ability is ultimately found in your speech and in your conduct and the things that you are doing to help cultivate and to help grow and to help blossom for the glory of God. So the only worry that you have to have then is this, when it comes to being fruitful, is not, can I be fruitful right now? Because the answer to that is yes. It's overwhelmingly yes. You can. The only question is, will you? Will you be fruitful with what you have been entrusted with? Will you be fruitful as a man in your design and cultivate good things in the life of others for the glory of God? So I think with that said, then, let's turn now here to some characteristics of manhood. If that's man's design, ultimately what has man been made for, then what should a man be? What are some attributes here of a biblical man? And again, I got 4. There's much more than this, but I hope these 4 are hopefully encouraging here for you men. So first characteristic of a man here that I have is strength. So brethren, men are to be strong. Let's look at here 1 Corinthians 16:13. This was our New Testament reading that Mike read. I want you to hear what Paul says to the church at Corinth here. 1 Corinthians 16:13. Paul exhorts the Corinthians with this. He says, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong." Now, what's interesting here about where we find this verse and its context is Paul's not just talking to men here, is he? Right? Paul writes to the Corinthians as he's writing this letter. He's writing to a church. So is Paul just writing to men in the church here in 1 Corinthians? No. Right? He has, this letter would have been read out loud in the church. It would have been read to everybody, the men, the women, the children, all these people. So this letter it would have been intended to be read to the entire congregation and would have obviously naturally included women here. And so Paul's exhortation for the Christians here to be strong, while it does include both men and women, here's what is fascinating about Paul's choice of words and how he just phrases this whole section. I mean, think about how Paul is doing this. When it comes to Paul encouraging the church to remain strong, right, and to remain steadfast, who does Paul use as his chief example for how the church is to imitate strength? Who does he use as the example to encourage the church to be strong? Who's the example? Men, right? The chief example of strength in Paul's mind is men, right? Because Paul could have, he does it other places. It's all over the New Testament. Be strong, be steadfast, be immovable. It says that everywhere. But here he specifically includes that this strength would be seen in the light of acting like men or doing what a man does, which is to be strong. And he very deliberately here and intentionally uses a word that I think ties these two ideas together, strength and masculinity, right? For Paul, these two ideas are inseparable here. His exhortation to the church to act like men, I think, shows that in Paul's mind, the virtue, the characteristic of being strong, of having strength, while it is something that men and women do, brethren, it is primarily embodied and displayed in a man. And so even though strength is not just masculine, it is especially, though, brethren, a characteristic of what a good man is. And therefore it proves to be a useful example to anybody. Which means then that strength, being strong, is a vital characteristic of what it means to be a man. Now, what it typically means to be strong is much more than we typically think about strength in our day, right? When we say be strong, we usually think of somebody being physically fit or very physically capable, right? And I'll just say this, that's not entirely wrong. Sometimes preachers get up and be like, oh, it has nothing to do with being physically strong. And it's like, well, there's just Bible verses that actually commend men for being strong, right? Proverbs speaks positively here about a young man's physical strength, Proverbs 20:29. The glory of a young man is his what? His strength. And you even have Paul there in the New Testament. It's kind of a side comment, but he says about physical training, that physical training has what? It's got some value, right? Being physically strong is not disconnected from your manhood. Physical training, physical ability does have some tie in what it means to be a man. And I'll just say it this way. Being physically strong, men, is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But, here's the but, okay? It is not everything, right? If we were to say being strong is what it means to be a man, then none of us in here are that great of men, and all the gym, freaks who are on roids right now are the most manly men in the entire world. And brethren, we obviously just know that that's just not the case. I mean, you very well know that men can be strong in mass and in size, but be boys at heart. For men, being physically strong is important, but you can be strong, brothers, and lack strength. In the Bible, strength is much more associated with a man being courageous and a man being steadfast in the midst of difficulty or hardship. So let me say that again. The Bible's primary emphasis when it comes to masculine strength is associated with courageousness, being steadfast, being immovable, being a man who can endure difficult things, right? And strength often gets displayed in the Bible as a virtue in the context of men being called to lead when leading is hard, right? This is where this virtue really gets put to the test. This is where this virtue really shines. Strength gets displayed as a premium masculine virtue when it's put under pressure and the man has to bear the weight of responsibility. I want you to think of an example here, right? Think about God's words to Joshua in Joshua chapter 1. Was Joshua a strong man physically? I would say he had to have been. Dude was a warrior, right? And yet God has to come to Joshua in Joshua chapter 1, who's probably a very able, very capable man physically. And what does God have to tell Joshua? Be strong and be courageous. Well, I thought Joshua's capable. He's strong, right? He's got muscle. He can handle guys. Well, God has to come in and tell him in Joshua 1, he tells him, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and don't be dismayed, for the Lord your God's with you wherever you go. I mean, brethren, the idea of strength for Joshua has everything to do with him bearing the weight of his responsibility and not chickening out, right? He's not going to cower. He's not going to grow frightened and then just leave. He has got to look at his present situation. He's been put into a massive leadership role, and he is bearing the weight of a nation. And now he has to go in and he has to conquer. The idea is that Joshua is going to need to display strength and courage, brethren, in the face of overwhelming odds. His ability to not give way to fear and to retreat is the essence of his strength. And brethren, that is biblical strength. No retreat. His strength is summed up here in that he trusts the Lord. And so he says, Lord, I will bear the weight. I will bear the responsibility. Because guess what? God doesn't call a man to something that he won't see him through with. His strength is summed up in trusting God. And so he bears the weight of responsibility. He leads the people. But brethren, he does so when he is under the most pressure and the most scrutiny. And this is the idea, I think, of what Paul has in mind when he exhorts the Corinthians in this. I mean, he's telling Christians in the faith, you need to be watchful and you need to stand firm. Feet planted on the ground. You're not going to be moved. Someone's not going to chicken you out. You're not going to run and flee. You're going to stand firm. How? Act like a man. Be strong. And so how does Paul expect them to display this strength then? By standing firm in the faith. By not giving way to doubt and unbelief. Brethren, this is strength. And here is where Christians must, especially us men, must learn this. Brethren, just as you would hope that a man would not enter the battlefield and be scared and ultimately flee, but even when he is scared, would be courageous in the face of fear and doubt, and he would stand his ground, that he would not abandon his post. Brethren, this is too the imagery of the Christian man, that he would be firm, that he would maintain his composure and that he would stand his post in the faith. This is the type of strength that men are to display. This is biblical strength. It's courageous and steadfast in the midst, listen to that, in the midst of opposition and hardship. It is not abandoning your post. So men, what I want to challenge you with this is the chief way in which myself, the way in which you need to cultivate this in your life, because there's really not a whole lot of ways to cultivate strength. It's very simple. The chief way that you cultivate strength as a characteristic of your manhood is that you embrace challenge. We have got to be men that when challenge comes up, we don't go, oh, dude, I don't want to deal with that. That's not a man. When challenge arrives, we stand rather than run. We embrace the hardship, not because the hardship is fun. I'm not trying to tell you to smile. Oh, good. Suffering, trial, hardship, conflict. But I am asking you, brethren, to embrace the opportunity, because you will never learn strength in times of ease, ever. Just like you will never build muscle when you don't have some weight underneath you. It just doesn't work, brethren. You won't become the man you want to be outside of times of hardship. You will never be strong if your life is one of simple ease. You need weight. Men need weight. You need pressure. These things are not meant to destroy you or to crush you. They're meant to refine you. And so, brethren, when a hard thing comes your way, get under the weight. Don't abandon it. Get under the weight, be strong, and act like men. Second characteristic of a man that I think is important is that a man be loving. Now, I remember Nick, I think this was 2021. Feels like a lifetime ago. Nick had preached a sermon at a men's retreat, of all places. It was a great sermon. On this text that we read in 1 Corinthians 16. And it was the first time where I had read this text so many times. But then when he drew out a particular point, I was like, oh man, I don't know how. I just haven't seen that there before, right? There in 1 Corinthians 16 with all this talk about strength, acting like men, the stuff that makes us go like, ooh, yeah, get riled up. Right at the end is the command that for men to be men, that in all things they're to be loving. That the command there is to do all things in the purview of love. And again, I know love is not exclusive to the male characteristic. I get that. But brethren, it is undoubtedly highlighted about men, especially the Lord Jesus, over and over and over and over again. Scriptures hold love up as probably the supreme virtue of a man. But we got to kind of ask ourselves, what is love? And you go out like we did at First Friday and you ask 10 people what love is, oh my gosh, you're going to get all sorts of different answers. And the most common that you usually think of is love is just how I feel. It's if I like something. It's an emotion. It's something that stirs my soul. If I love something, it's because I have a warm feeling inside about it. And before we knock that, there is truth to that, right? Love does begin in the heart. It does begin with your emotions where something captures your attention. But brethren, love in the Bible, especially when men are described to be loving, it is always described as an action and not just as a feeling or some fleeting emotion. In Scripture, love is associated with you as a man acting on behalf of other people, right? If you love someone or something, then you'll act a certain way. You'll do certain things for them or for those things. And you think of this example here that Paul gives in Ephesians, right? Love is spoken of between a husband and a wife, of a husband loving his wife. It's spoken of in a way that in the context doesn't have anything to do with feelings per se. It's not so much that a husband is to love his wife by just having, warm, fuzzy feelings about her, which that's fine and that's good, that's proper. I'm not saying that's not important. But brethren, what is described in Ephesians is not the feelings so much as what the husband does for his wife. Listen to Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives. How? As Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I mean, you hear that? Husbands, the way they love, in this context, the way they love their wife is the way that Christ loved. And Christ performed an action. He gave himself for his people. And husbands, your love likewise ought to look like you, not just sending your wife heart messages, but actually laying out your life for her in action. Right? And this is how Jesus speaks about his own love towards his disciples. Jesus does not speak about loving his disciples as just some feeling in his heart. He speaks about love this way, John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. Brethren, in both of these contexts, how's love displayed? In action. I mean, it has to. Yes, brethren, I do not want to be the person who is only loving by being duty-bound. I love because I was told to love. I want warmth. I want affection. Those are good things, biblical things, but we can't miss the end goal of those feelings. In both of these contexts, love is displayed through action, and it's more than just action. It's not just, I filled up my wife's water. It's displayed in the man sacrificing and giving himself for another. That's what love looks like. Whether that actually be in Jesus' example, a man is laying down his life for his friends, for somebody else, or maybe in a more symbolic gesture of giving up your life, your strength, your energy, your resources, not for yourself, but for others. And so what we could say then here about love as a man, biblical love, is that love for men is to be self-sacrificial love. Love is to be giving oneself for the sake and betterment of others. It is pouring out everything you have for the ones you love. And this is the kind of love, brothers, that we need to display. Philippians 2:4, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. To love well here, as a man, is to give yourself for the interests and sake of others. It's considering their needs. It's considering their interests. It is using your strength, brethren, that actual physical strength that God's blessed you with, it's to use that strength. But more importantly, it's for you to use that strength within, that resolve, that renewal, that ability to take the weight off of other people's shoulders, to bear the load of responsibility so that you can serve others well. This is why a man leads. He is a man who loves because he's not self-serving. He is rather looking to please others. He's not looking out for himself only. And a godly man who loves well is one who is concerned with others. And so men, you ought to love well. Because it is a virtue of being a man. It is no, if I could put it this way, it is no sissy thing. to love. Loving is actually hard. It is actually the easy thing. It is actually the childish thing to not love, because then I don't have to pour out my strength. Then I don't have to give myself to my children and to my wife and to you all. But the manly thing, the real essence of love is I will pour out myself for you all and for my family. And brethren, you want to have that type of love, that you would love well. That as Jesus says, that a seed can't bear fruit unless it first dies and goes into the ground. Brethren, you have to give it all to gain it all. Love well by spending your strength for the good of your God and for the good of your people. And so third characteristic that marks a man is that he is also self-controlled. So again, virtue is marked by both men and women, but again, self-control throughout the Bible, especially the New Testament, in Timothy and Titus alone, is used of men 3 times, right? It's used of older men, younger men, it's used of overseers, it's used of deacons. It is a sign of a biblical man. And brethren, this is one that we want to take to heart well, because the proverb here warns us in Proverbs 25:28. Proverb here says, "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." Men, do you want to be that? The desolate city that has been ravaged, that has been desolated, that is left utterly empty and ruined because you would not have self-control in your life. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. Brothers, this is really important. Without self-control, your life will be one of exposure, of vulnerability, and ultimately you'll be left to ruin. You guarantee it. We need to take this one here very seriously. So let me give you, I think, 2 areas. These are not the only ones, but I think these are probably the most common for men. Areas that the Scriptures call us to exercise self-control. So first one, we are to exercise self-control in our appetites or our desires. Now, I'm not just talking about food here. I'm using a little bit of an older phrase. Appetites is more than just what you want to eat for lunch, because we all know what I want to eat for lunch. Your appetites or your desires are like your passions. It's the things that you crave, right? And a man, brethren, who cannot control fleshly desires, even if it is something like food, a man who can't control his different passions, his appetites, his lusts, he will come to ruin. This type of man ends up becoming impulsive. He gives way to his desires the way an animal gives way to hunger. Simply when he desires, he takes. And brothers, that is not who we want to be. Because this is how Paul speaks of ungodly people. Philippians 3:19, Paul says of ungodly people, their God is their what? Their belly, their appetites, their desires, their fleshly impulses. These people, their God, the one who controls them, is their appetite. It dictates them, and it causes them to do everything that it wants them to do. But brothers, listen to this. You as Christians, listen. This is not who you are. Before you think about how do I exercise self-control, remember that you first and foremost are a Christian man. You have a status of being somebody who has been given the Spirit of God. You are not beasts. You are not somebody who has to act impulsively like an animal to fulfill an appetite the minute that it arises up. Brothers, you are men who have the Spirit of God in you by grace. And by grace, men, though, you need to hear this. Grace comes in to save, but grace comes in to transform. You can, by God's grace, by the Spirit, not just be made new and to cleansed from the things that you find yourselves entrapped to. Brethren, you can no longer be entrapped by them. You can exercise godly self-control in Christ. And brethren, in fact, you must exercise self-control, right? If you don't master your appetites will end up mastering you. Sin cannot have its dominion over us any longer. And so we need to take, I think, Paul's instructions here to heart and almost make this our anthem, because I think it's the most helpful thing that you can hear when it comes to how do I begin to take self-control over my appetites, my lusts, my desires. Paul in 1 Corinthians 9:25 begins like this. He says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So," listen to what Paul says, "I do not run aimlessly. I do not box," or you could say train, "as one beating the air." He says, "But I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." Men, hear that. Because by God's grace and by God's Spirit, that reality has been opened up to you. You are not to run aimlessly. You are to be running this race, seeking to be self-controlled because of the prize that's before you. And men, you have got to put eternity before your eyes. You have got to put the heavenly glory, the eternal weight of glory, which is eternal life itself, before your eyes. And then in doing so, you need to take your appetites, take your passions, and you need to beat them and bring them into subjection to the lordship of Jesus Christ. Paul says that brethren, it's like he beats his body to do this thing. He exercises self-control so that ultimately, brethren, his appetites would not get the best of him and he would not run in vain. So brothers, take that and make that your anthem, that I will discipline my body, keep it under control no matter what the appetite is. But another thing, brethren, that I think we as men need to be mindful of, have self-control in, is our emotions. Ungoverned emotions plunge people into ruin. Listen to some of these proverbs. You don't need to turn to these because I want you to hear them, right? Listen to some of these proverbs. Proverbs 14:17. "A man of quick temper acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated." Proverbs 14:30. "A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot." Proverbs 15:13. "A glad heart makes a cheerful face, but by sorrow of heart the spirit is crushed." Brethren, each of those cases, it is an unchecked emotion that brings the man to ruin. A man whose quick temper causes him to act foolishly, ruin. A man whose envy is deep in his heart rots his bones out. And a man who is constantly drowning in sorrow, never to find any cheerfulness or gladness in anything, is crushed in spirit. I mean, brethren, these are all descriptions of what happens to a man when he cannot have self-control over his emotions. But the man who is self-controlled, brethren, who does govern his emotions, he's described in the Proverbs this way: He's described as this mighty and strong one. Here's Proverbs 16:32. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than the one who takes a city. I mean, listen to that again. We kind of have to slow down to hear what he's saying. Whoever's slow, right, to anger, right, this is someone who's got his anger, his emotions under check. He is better than the mighty, or you could say the mighty ones, strong men of renown, men who are able. Whoever is slow to anger is better than those mighty men, and the one who rules his spirit better than the one who takes a city. I mean, brethren, do you believe that? Do you believe it would be more fitting for you as a man to be a ruler, a conqueror, someone who's big and who's strong, or one who can master his emotions and maybe he's not big and strong? Brethren, I'd have you weigh those at the balances and weigh them well. A man who can rule his spirit and not be ruled by his emotions is mightier, stronger, and of greater renown than any mighty man of old physically. And so men, listen, if you want to rule well and ultimately win this world for Jesus, then you have got to begin with number one, you. We will not win anything to Jesus if we don't win ourselves. Now, I don't mean save ourselves, but I mean have self-control, brethren. You've got to rule your own person first before you can go out into the world and exercise rulership. So, brethren, being a good man here means that you have self-control, not mastered by anything. And then lastly here as we finish, lastly, brethren, a man must be faithful. He needs to display, I think, first aspect of faithfulness, he needs to display integrity in all that he does, right? This is something that I often actually tell a bunch of 16-year-olds who come into my store every day and they're like, so Mr. Aaron, what's a good employee like here? And this is probably the number one thing that I share with them. Be someone of integrity. Be somebody who is honest in all that they do. I mean, it's interesting that Nick actually read Psalm 24 there at the beginning as our call to worship, right? The man who can ascend the Lord's hill, he's honest in all he does. Like he has clean hands and a pure heart. He has integrity, right? He does things honestly, and he does these things not only in his work, but he also does these things in his personal life. His character reflects integrity in his relationships. He's not building things off lies, off falsehoods. He is somebody ultimately that can be trusted because he does the right thing, even, brethren, as I tell people, when nobody's looking. And the Bible commends this. And the Bible says, whoever walks in integrity walks securely. Why? Because, brethren, integrity for you, especially as a man, integrity acts as like a shield for you. So that when you're walking around carefree. You're unbothered by what you may have not done or what you may have lied about or what you may have fibbed and maybe you smudged a little bit, right? Your integrity acts as this ability to protect you. You're not afraid of man's reproach. What's a man going to say to me? Aaron, you took the trash out the right way. Okay, right? I don't have to be afraid of what a man may say about me. But brethren, even more importantly, I don't have to be afraid of retribution from God, because though I am not perfect, and though you will not be perfect, brethren, if you are trying to live blameless before the Lord, then you know that before God, you have sought to live in honesty and integrity. And brethren, it is like a shield. And that is freeing to know that I don't have to worry about the enemy's arrow coming and get me, because I have been honest in all that I've done, obviously to the best of my ability. But faithfulness, brethren, while it does include integrity, I think includes more than just being honest and being of good character. I think faithfulness also carries with it in the scriptures of loyalty, perseverance and commitment, right? Because somebody could have integrity, right? I could show up to a job, work 2 weeks, work to the best of my ability, honest in my work, but I'm not really committed, not loyal to the business. I leave very quickly, and I don't want to commit myself to this. Well, brethren, that's what faithfulness is. Faithfulness has this idea not of being a good person, but as a person you are loyal and persevere in all of your commitments. That could be your commitments to projects, to work, to movements. Brethren, that could also be commitment to one another. A man of faithfulness, if you want to find a man of faithfulness, is one who remains committed even when it becomes very inconvenient for him to remain committed. And brethren, first and foremost, this means that to be a faithful man, you have to be committed and loyal to Jesus. And I know that sounds really silly, but brethren, is not life a big temptation that gets you to deny Jesus? To walk away from Jesus? To deny Him before men? Which Jesus says, if you deny me before men, I'll deny you before the Father. Right? This is first and foremost something that needs to be displayed in our faithfulness to the Lord. And again, brethren, none of you will be perfect. I mean, Peter, an apostle, the guy who wrote a couple epistles, was not perfectly faithful. But brethren, he did not abandon his commitment ultimately. He did remain loyal even though he faltered at a point. He remained loyal, he remained committed. And so a man that will not abandon the Lord is the mark of faithfulness. Hear this in Revelation chapter 2 to John's exhortation to the church at Smyrna. He calls them to remain faithful, and he says in verse 10, "Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life." Remain committed. Remain loyal. Do not forsake the Lord. And brethren, this ought to be our chief aim as men, to be faithful to the Lord. But lastly, I want to exhort you men here in this, and we will touch on this in much greater detail when it comes to preaching about friendship. But brothers, us as men in this room, we ought to be men of faithfulness to one another. Listen to this proverb here, Proverbs 26. Many a man proclaims his own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find? And brethren, the reason the author says this is because a lot of men like to talk about their faithfulness. They like to appear faithful. But then when push comes to shove, a faithful man who can find? There's not a lot of good, faithful men here in the world anymore. But brothers, I don't want us to despair about this, because guess what? While I can't control what other men do, you can. You can control you. You can today go, I will be a faithful man. Not just to the Lord, but when I make commitments to people, when I make commitments to things, when I make commitments to friends, to churches, I am faithful to those commitments. And brothers, if there's anything else that I could commend you in this morning, it's that you would be faithful to your brothers here in this room. That your brotherhood would not be something you can so easily throw away. Because many a men proclaim their steadfast love, but a real faithful man, brethren, who can find? And brothers, listen, when you find a faithful man in your life, you hold on. And you don't let go of a faithful man. And this may be one of the hardest and most difficult things for us as men to find today. But brothers, listen, you don't have to look out there. We can make that commitment to each other here, to be faithful till the end. That like Jesus, He loved those disciples till the end. And brethren, though this may be hard, faithful man who can find? Maybe he's a dime, maybe he's a diamond in the rough, so to speak. Brethren, it can be had. Loyalty and faithfulness to one another can mark us as men. So as we close here, brethren, I want us to consider again What's a man? Brethren, you as a man, you're a worshiper. You are a ruler. You are a cultivator. And you are to display in your character strength and love, self-control, faithfulness. And as we close here, men, as I address you one more time, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men. Let's pray.